In this video, we are going to learn about this bindings in class components. So we already have a class component, but let's create a new component for this part. So already we have for header, but let's create a new component for this part, which will create a functional also, class also, and then we'll take our example from there. Now we are going to add that inside components folder only, so it might be getting big. So let's refactor it a bit, where I'm going to move all these files in this folder, and you can see that automatically wherever it is used, so for example here it was used, so automatically it is renamed. Just you have to do save and then it will be fine. So now you can see that whatever changes I make, that is happening fine, which means that this component is working. Okay, but what we will do is that we are going to create a new component for this also, and right now let's create a new component called greeting, and obviously this component is not created right now. We are going to create a new component. So inside components only, let's create a new folder called greeting, and inside that we are going to create greeting.js. okay, we are going to create a function called greeting. From that we are going to return a JSX, which is going to be the same as used here. Okay, that is fine, and then we are going to export this function. Okay, so that is greeting export function, not export default. Yeah, now this greeting can be imported inside app.js. So let's import it. Import greeting from components greeting. Fine. So now we should be good to go. Okay, so this is working fine. So let's change anything in greeting component, and we can see that it is working fine. Okay, now we will also have a class component for the same thing. So let's create a class component, which is, let's say, greeting2.js, which is essentially just greeting component only, but it is now a class component. So rather than a normal function, we are going to have a class. So class greeting extends React component, and this class will have a render function which will return the same JSX which we were using there, and then we will export this. So we will export default greeting. Fine. And what will be the JSX? Simply hello world. Okay, so this should be fine. Let's use this component also. So here we can test that out. We can test that out here. Let's say this is greeting and this is greeting2. Let's name it greeting2. Okay, so you can see that hello world. For the sake of clarity, if I am printing hello world 1 here, hello world 2 here, then you can see that the first one is coming from the functional component, second one is coming from the class component. Let's do one more thing. Let's now pass the name in greeting component rather than header component. Yeah, so in header obviously that was name was being used, but now since I'm not passing anything, so this props.name will be basically undefined, right? So that name will not come. Anyways, it's fine. Right now we are just trying to test greeting component. So yeah, that thing which we've passed name, it can only be used once we use it. So how do we use it? We pass props, and here we can use props dot name. Fine. So this is working fine, but in case of class components, we know that we cannot we don't have any direct way, we have indirect way using this. So this we can use this dot props dot name, and this will also work fine. If we want to have different names, then for class component, let's pass Bob, and that should be fine. Okay, so this is working fine. Let's comment class component for now. We'll focus on the functional component. What we want to do is that it's a p tag. Let's have a div tag, and let's have this thing inside p inside div tag. Let's do the same thing here also, because later both should be same only. So yeah, this should be fine. But the main idea why we are trying to do that is that we want to add a button here. So let's add a button here, and let's say click me, and we want to create a event listener. So on click is equal to, and then let's say handle click. So this should be a function. We have discussed earlier, right, that in normal HTML this on click is all small letters, and here there is a string where function name with parentheses done. But in case of React, this thing is denoted as camel case, and whatever is passed, that is a proper function variable, and that function you can define. So for example, you can define here, let's say function this thing, and let's say log, let's say clicked. Okay, and now if you see, then you'll have a click me, and then when you click, then you'll see that clicked is printed. Okay, that is fine. Just one more thing, this thing is camel case for all JSX elements, for all HTML related things. So for example, even if you have something like form, there also we remember that we had on submit or something, right? So on submit, here also you can see that this on submit thing is not small, on submit is camel case, right? S is capital, and again this thing will be also some function. So handle submit or something, that this function again you have to define somewhere, right? So the idea is that only that it has to be camel case, all the event listeners has to be camel case. Okay, that is fine. Let's do one thing. That what I want to do is that I want to pass I want to print the, let's say, this props, whatever this props is there, I want to print that. How can I do that? Now here is the problem. Earlier we saw that whenever it is not needed, we can remove it, we can move it outside the function, right? But now we need to do something like this, that I want to print props, but then props is not available outside, and that's why I have to move this function inside. Okay, so this is how it works. And now if you click, then you can see that the props, whatever is passed, that is printed. How to do the same thing in case of class components? In case of class components, you'll see that obviously you can add, like whatever here button is there, that you can add here, that should be straightforward. But now where do I define this handle click? If I define this handle click outside, then obviously I cannot access it. I cannot access props, because this dot props is only available inside class, right? So the way to do is that you can define a function. Here, right? And then inside that you can do the same thing whatever you are doing here. However, the only difference will be that now you have to write this dot props rather than normal props, right? But again, this thing is also it's like not defined, right? Why? Because now since this handle click is defined inside class, this has to be referred using this. So this dot handle click will work. So this dot handle click means in this class, this dot handle click some property is there, and that property will be actually, you will see that that is a function which is already defined, and then you can print like here you're printing props here in class components, you can use this dot props. Okay, but obviously this will not be rendered because we are not using class components as of now. So let's comment this and uncomment this, and let's use the same name greeting. So now whatever is rendered, this is using class components. So let's remove this for now for avoiding confusion. This thing is a class component rendered, right? So you can see that this is there. Now if you click this, then you are seeing that some error is coming, right? Cannot read properties of undefined, reading props. So it is saying that somehow here props is undefined, because that's what it is saying, that cannot read props of undefined. Let's try to simply print this, and it will be more clear that this is undefined. So why is that happening? This is happening because this is a normal function. Okay, now when this function is called, then the in by default React does not bind the context is what? Context should be the class, right? But the React, while calling this on click event handler, it does not by default binds the context, and because of that there is no context here. And why this is undefined by default? Because if there is no context, then in a strict mode, we have already learned that in a normal function, in a strict mode, this is undefined. And why this is strict mode? Because this is class, and we know that class by default runs in strict mode. So that's why this thing is happening. Now there are a number of ways in which you can solve this problem. There are 4 ways, in fact. I'll tell you one by one. In fact, I'll tell you what is the one which I prefer most, but let's see firstly all the 4 solutions. The first one is that, yeah, when this thing is called, then this is not having context bound to it, right? So let's bind this context, which means that this function, I should bind the context of this class. Now we can do that inside constructor. So while this React component will be created, what we will do, this constructor will be called, because when React component will be created, then essentially an instance of this class is created, and whenever an instance of the class is created, then constructor is called, right? So this thing is going to be called. Okay, so we know that we have to use this dot. So essentially first thing we have to do is that we have to call super with props. And why we do that? Because whenever we are trying to access this, super with props should be called. We already learned this, right? Now what we are going to do, this dot handle click is equal to this dot handle click dot bind. We want to bind what we are trying to bind, the current this. Okay, if we do this much, then what is happening, that now this dot handle click is different from directly like this dot handle click. This dot handle click is now normal whatever was defined handle click, but this, which means that the context of this class is bound to this function, which means that now when I when I click, then whatever is called, that has already this context bound to it. And now if you see that if now I click, then I get a proper that instance thing, which means that now this dot props will work, because this is now not undefined, and that's why you can see that the prop is coming fine. Okay, that is the first way. The second way is that, let's comment this. So right now obviously this thing is going to be undefined. The second way is that we are using this normal function, right? What if we convert it to a field which is an arrow function? What happens if I do something like this? If I do something like this, then now it is a normal field and it is an arrow function, and we know the property of the arrow function. If inside arrow function we use some this, then that this will be taken from the outer context. And what is the outer context? The class itself, right? So whatever is that instance of that class, that is going to be this. So again, simply converting that thing to this arrow function field will work. So now you can see that if I click, then this is class instance, which means that now again this dot props will work fine. So that was the second method. Okay, fine. Let's get back to the function thing only for now, because I want to show you the third method. Now this thing is again undefined, which means that this is undefined. Okay, so two ways we have seen how to solve this. The third way is that why don't we bind while passing itself. So here we bound while constructing the instance, but right now, till now nothing is bound, but as we create a button element, then that time we will bind it, which means that here only we will bind with this. And what bind returns? Bind returns the bound function. So this whole thing is now a bound function, and on click argument requires a bound requires even essentially a function. That's why the function which is given to on click is a bound version of this handle click, right? And that's why this will also work fine. You'll see that this also works fine. Okay, and again this dot props will work in this case also. That is the third way. Okay, so if that was not the case, then obviously that thing will be undefined. Now let's see the fourth way. The fourth way is that I use an arrow function here. Okay, so what is happening essentially is that earlier normal this function was directly called not, it was that reference function reference was directly given. Now I'm creating a new function, and now obviously this is also a function. On click requires a function, so I'm still providing a function, but that function internally has internally is an arrow function, which means that now arrow function property will be applied here, which means that arrow function property is what? That this is taken from the outer context. So again, when I'm attaching this, I'm trying to pass this function to on click, then this is going to be taken from the outer context, and that is class instance, which means that the component instance will be there, which means that this is going to be a component instance. And that's why now this dot handle click, when I do, then here proper this will come, because now handle click is not called without context, rather I'm using something dot function name that I'm calling. And whenever I do something dot function calling, then, and this is a normal function, right, not an arrow function, which means that this thing will be the context inside this will be whatever I provide here, right? So we earlier saw, right, obj dot some function, which means that, and then inside that function the context will be obj. So similarly, handle click is called using this dot handle click, which means that inside handle click, which is a normal function, the context inside this will be this, and this is, we already know this is so this will also work. This is the fourth way. So we can clearly see that this is also working fine. Okay, so here also again this dot props will work. Okay, now one thing I wanted to highlight here is that we saw that here actually when click event is, earlier it was coming, right? But now if you see, then that click event will not come, right? Click event E will be undefined. Why? Obviously this is coming, but that click event will be undefined because we have not passed that. So in this case you have to take care that if you need click event, then this E you have to properly pass. Okay, so whenever this function will be called, whatever the function you provide, the React will automatically call that function with event, click event, which is a synthetic event. We'll come back to it, but synthetic events are just a version of normal DOM events which are specific to React takes care of those things, but they are almost similar to normal DOM events, right? However, their functionality internally is different, but they are completely W3C compliant, and everything will work as it is. Now if we run, then you'll see that that click event, which is a synthetic event, now it is coming perfectly, which means that if we require something like e dot prevent default or something, if that sort of thing we wanted, right, prevent. So the point is that if something like this we are trying to do, then this is necessary. But if we are not trying to do something like this, then we don't need to pass. Right? But if you are using this fourth method, then you have to take care. Otherwise, you will automatically see that that e is undefined. So you will be undefined otherwise, right? However, we already know that if normal way we are using, then e will be passed. So right now you will see that e is passed, but this is now undefined. Okay, so all the four methods we have seen, but I prefer the second method, which is creating a field with arrow function. It is straightforward. Whenever you create some function, just create it like an arrow function, and then this will work out of the box, which means that now you can see that synthetic event is also coming perfectly, and the props are also attached properly, which means that this dot props will work as expected. Okay, so no need of doing this constructor thing right now, and this should be working fine. So we have got the props. Let's see one more thing, how to pass arguments to event handlers, which means that yeah, there is a click button here, and let's say there is one more click button, click 1 and click 2, but I want to know that whether this button was clicked or this button was clicked. See, handler is same, but still I want to know, which means that if let's say I click here or click here, at both cases I just get props, that is fine, but I cannot see that which button I clicked. I want to know that. So in order to do that, I have to pass some arguments here. Okay, now this thing is automatically called by React. So how do I create a function which I pass custom arguments for? In order to do that, what you can do is that you can create a function and then call it yourself with that argument. So let's say one argument you want to call. So now if I call, so let's say 1 and 2, and now you see that this first argument is what is happening. The earlier when automatically it was called, then first argument was event, right? But now I am manually passing a first argument, which means that if I want to capture event, then I have to manually capture and send it as the second argument. Understand? So now the first argument will be id, which you are passing from here, and the second argument will be event. And now if you print id and print event, then you'll see that if I click the first one, then the id is 1 and then a synthetic event and then props, and then if I click 2, then id is 2, synthetic event and props. So you can clearly see that I can also capture the idea that whether the first one was clicked or second one was clicked, but for that I definitely want to pass some argument, and that I can pass in this way. But this is one way. Okay, there's another way also in which you can do the same thing, and that other way is that rather than creating your own function like this, we already know the concept of bind, and we know that in case of bind we can pass arguments also. We can bind arguments also. Rather than this, we can also bind arguments. Now we know that this cannot be now right now what is happening, this dot handle click, this is an arrow function. In arrow function there is no point of binding this, but still if I use this bind syntax, then something I have to pass in first. So let's pass simply null. But the main point is that this second argument now, if I bind 1, which means that the first argument which is going to be passed to this function is going to be 1. And now if this thing, this whole thing is a function, bind returns a function, right? So this whole thing, when this is called by React on click, then the first argument automatically is given as 1 because one argument I have bound. And while it is calling that, then obviously it is calling it with event. We already know that React will call whatever function you give, that it calls with event. And we know this concept that in bind, whatever argument you already bound, if again you call that function with additional arguments, then those additional arguments are also passed, right? Which means that this ID will automatically be available here in ID, but this will also be called with event, and that event will come as a second argument, which means that after one argument is already bound, and after that whatever this function is called with, that is also passed. And we can prove this by just running. So you'll see that when I click, then you can see that the argument which you pass, that is also coming, and synthetic event is also coming because that is what it is passed called with while it is called. And now obviously that concept will work whether it is first or second, you can clearly identify. Okay, so that is the second way. However, this second way, here null works because this is an arrow function, right? If this would have been a normal function like this, then clearly this will not work. Why? Because now I am binding this, and this is null, right? I cannot bind this. I have to properly bind. I cannot bind null, sorry. I have to bind this. Now if I bind this, then this is a proper binding, and this is a normal function which is bound to this, and this works in this case also. So you can see that 1 and 2. But definitely I favor this way only, that here it is an arrow function, and here I don't need to pass anything. So in fact, I don't favor this way. This way works, that is fine, but still I favor here also the way in which the arrow function was used here also. So rather than this, I would rather call it with 1 and E, and that E is captured from here. Okay, so click 1 and click 2. So this is what I prefer, arrow function here also and arrow function here also in case of passing arguments also. So yeah, now you can clearly see that this works fine. So yeah, this is what I wanted to say, and now you can by now I think you can understand that what is the behavior of this, and especially in class components you have to understand that how this is being handled. Okay, so that will be all for this video. Thanks.